Honestly, a lot of trust gets broken down because we don't talk about the agreements. We're not clear about the agreements. We're acting on the expectations of it. And then when there does seem to be an egregious thing that happens, we immediately go to the beat up, the criticizing, not to the agreements.
Hey, thank you for coming. Welcome to the Love Shack.
Hey, welcome to the Love Shack. It's a little old place where we get together, explore fresh perspectives, and eavesdrop on juicy conversations to discover the things that really matter while having a little bit of fun along the way. This is episode number 131, and we're going to be talking about, do you and your partner need to rebuild trust? If so, it's a common theme. There's usually, at some point in time in every relationship history, places where we feel like we need to rebuild the trust between us. We're going to talk about how you do that and the best ways to go about rebuilding trust and what trust really is. But before we start, I just want you to imagine for a moment if all relationships had no agreements, like whatsoever. What do you imagine would be taking place? How would you co-create life with another person if everyone just did what they wanted to do autonomously? Spent money, took care of the kids when it suited them, cleaned, went to work, cooked, paid the bills, and had sex how and whenever they wanted to. The reality is there is typically one person in the relationship that tracks the needs of the household and is typically described to be then because they constantly see what needs to be done and what is not being done. And very often their partners handle this by criticizing them, or even worse, by also trying to avoid a fight by agreeing to do those things of which they know they have no intentions of completing in the first place. But they don't want to have that conversation. They don't want to take that on. And if you really start to think about it, it's the lack of understanding agreements and the lack of what it is we're committing to actually between both parties, and the lack of fulfilling these things that eventually ends up breaking down the trust that we so desperately desire in our relationships. So imagine for a moment if the roles were reversed in your relationship. The person who's taking care of the household tasks all of a sudden became the person who committed to a bunch of things that they had no intentions of doing just to avoid a fight or avoid the conversation altogether. And perhaps that starts to give us an idea of what typically plays out in our households over time when maybe you're the person who either keeps track of things or you're the person who's constantly trying to get out of things because you have your own emotional internal experience going on. You're overwhelmed at work. You feel pressure. You feel all kinds of things. And I've seen this personally in my clients play out regardless of gender roles. I know you probably are thinking, oh yeah, that's all women. No, actually, I know a lot of men who are the keepers of the household and the women are trying to avoid the conversations to participate or be a part of. And yes, females can do it too. So I want you to step out of the gender role for a minute and just think about the experience that plays out in our relationships overall. Regardless of what gender we are, literally, there are people, human beings that are wired to keep track of what needs to be done and how much cereal is in the cupboard and where the kids are and what time soccer practice is and when the trash day is. And then there are others who are different types of thinkers. They're more of a big picture kind of thinker, and they're thinking about other things, and they tend to lose sight of those things that somebody else is tracking. And we can tend to go, yeah, I'll get to that. Yeah, that's no big deal. Yeah. And yet, come on, we're having real conversations in here. You have no intentions of doing it. You just don't want to say, you know what, I'm not going to get to that. You know what, I don't really want to do that. You know what, I don't feel like that's really my turn. You know what, I'm not going to do this. And so we make an agreement, we make a commitment. And sometimes we make agreements and commitments and we don't even realize that we're making an agreement and a commitment because it's happening in the cockles of my own mind, in my own heart space. I feel like I know what it takes in order to, or what somebody should be doing, and I expect you to do that, but we're not having a conversation about it. And it's in all these small ways that we experience betrayals that end up sacrificing the trust that we have in each other and in our relationship. And I want to take this just a step further. I want you to realize that regardless of what side you might find yourself on in this conversation, that the true price is paid when we dump somebody in the soup. Because here's the thing I know to be true as a human being. We track what we're committing to. We track what it is we're avoiding and what we're trying to get out of. And we track when we're asking for help and we're not getting it. And so when somebody makes an agreement and then they break that agreement with us, it's not only going to affect the relationship between the us part, it's going to affect the way I see myself. And what I mean by that is when you dump somebody in the soup, regardless of your story that you might have attached to that, you know you're doing it. You know you're avoiding it. You know you're shutting it down. You know when you say, yeah, and you're not even clear about what the agreement is, that you're not going to do it. And that causes us to circle back around. And there's a voice inside of all of us that starts to say, you know what? You're so full of shit. You're such a liar. Why are you doing this? And then we exaggerate the story and gather more evidence. And yet I really don't feel good about the integrity, the confidence, the self-esteem that I'm building in myself. And that's really the true price that we pay. Your confidence, your self-esteem, and your personal integrity. This is the true price that is paid when we dump another person in the soup, or AKA don't live up to our agreements. Would it not be wonderful if we could have a conversation about what needs to be done? Everyone took true responsibility for what they could accomplish instead of fighting and comparing who has it roughest. Have you ever had that conversation? Like, oh no, I have it rougher than you. I do this and this and this and this and this. Yeah. Well, you don't know what it's like to be at work and have to deal with all of this and this and this and this and this. And like we're literally competing for who has the rougher job in the equation called our relationship and our family, and who is doing the most. Fighting about expectations, about my expectations of you and how this was supposed to be done and your expectations of me. And these things have typically never been spoken nor agreed upon as a couple, but carried in the hearts and minds of us as an individual. Agreements are truly the gateway of co-creation. And after all, that's what a relationship is. And all the emotional rewards that you desire and long for, being teamwork, being on the same page, trust, deep connection, and safety, they all are a byproduct of making agreements openly and honestly, and then seeing each other keep those agreements. That's what builds trust and confidence and deep intimacy over the long haul in our relationships. And that's the only way I know of in this moment that we create an experience of us. Otherwise, what ends up happening is that we live autonomous lives and we take care of the tasks of life and we check those boxes. But there is no us. There is no teamwork. There is no us working on something that is greater than the byproduct of us individually. It is through the agreements that we make and keep that help us feel good about who we are and how we're showing up, and have a deep, deep level of trust and confidence in the relationship that I'm co-creating with you. So without them, there can be no trust. Without them, there can be no experience of these things that we hold dear and long for deeply in our hearts and in our relationships. So if you're needing to rebuild trust in your relationship, agreements are an absolute must.
So is it fair to say then, when whatever agreements have been broken, which is what I would sense is causing the trust that is no longer there, then we need to create some new agreements going forward to rebuild that trust?
Yeah. Honestly, a lot of trust gets broken down because we don't talk about the agreements. We're not clear about the agreements. We're acting on the expectations of it. And then when there does seem to be an egregious thing that happens, we immediately go to the beat up, the criticizing, not to the agreements. And then I can almost become obsessive in trying to rebuild that trust by thinking that I need to make my partner jump through a lot of hoops in order to rebuild that trust. They have to pay a price. They have to be punished. There has to be a penance to be paid. And unfortunately, all of that takes us to a furthering breakdown of safety and trust. So let's just talk about trust for a minute before we talk about agreements, because I think it's really important for us to understand how trust is rebuilt. Trust, by a product of how we hold it, is kind of one of those nebulous things that we really don't understand. We know we need it in our relationships, and all of us would agree, oh yeah, we got to have trust. Relationships are built on trust. Okay, great. How does all that work, really? In the world of human behavior, it works a lot like this. When I say I don't trust you, what I'm saying is I don't feel comfortable risking with you anymore. In the beginning, I felt like I could risk the world. I felt like I could jump all in and throw caution to the wind, and we could be invincible and we could accomplish and do whatever it is we wanted to do. And then something happens, a disappointment, a big betrayal or a small betrayal. And we start to go, man, maybe I need to be more careful. Maybe I need to reconsider. Maybe I'm doing it wrong. And there's a lot of doubt and fear and personal insecurities that start to funnel in to the relationship itself. And then, depending on how I handle those, is going to determine how much I'm willing to risk with you again. And what I tend to do as a human being to try and create a safe space for me to operate here is I start to get a little critical. I start to get a little demanding. I start to get a little manipulative and pushy, and I leverage you and you leverage me. And then we start the comparison game, like I talked about just a few minutes ago, where I'm comparing who has it worse and who's doing more and who's doing less and how it should be done and how it should go. And that starts this spiral of breakdown. Unbeknownst to us, what we're not talking about is let's reset. Wait a minute. Let's talk about what you were expecting and what I was expecting. Wait a minute. Let's talk about new ways that we could go back to the drawing board and create places where I feel safe to risk with you again. And let's go from there. And that's not a cognitive thought that we have, but that's absolutely how trust is rebuilt over time. We take small risks that we become successful with over time, builds trust. If I can trust you to do this little thing, then I can trust you a little more. And if I can trust you to do this bigger thing, then I can trust in the even bigger thing, and so on and so on and so on. Once those little betrayals set in. And I want you to know that's going to be a natural, normal part of every single relationship. We're all going to have places where we go, ooh, maybe I'm not safe with you. Ooh, maybe I can't risk with you. Ooh, maybe I did it wrong. I got in too fast. I didn't give us enough time. I should have vetted this out more. Those are logical conversations that we start to have around a very emotional experience we call relationships. And literally all we need to do is reset and review our agreements and decide how it is and where it is we feel safe enough to risk again, and create some successes there. Some successes will lead to more successes. And then all of a sudden I go, yeah, I trust you completely.
So even if, let's just speak to the elephant in the room, the big trust one is obviously an affair, right? I mean, that's the one we hear all the time. But if I heard you correctly, even when that's not, even these more subtle, small breaches of trust that, like you say, inevitably are going to happen in every relationship, these same frameworks and processes still are very important.
Very much so. Everything from the egregious we would call an infidelity.
Right.
And I just need to say this, an infidelity is the biggest egregious marker in our relationships, because it tells me, or I make up in my mind, that when you have an affair, it means you don't care about me. I don't matter. This relationship doesn't matter. Our family doesn't matter. And if it doesn't matter, then what the hell are we doing? That's why that's the most egregious. I can maybe get over the fact that you forgot to do some things that you agreed to do, like mow the backyard, cut the weeds down, forget to pick up the chicken.
Or even say forgot our anniversary.
Yeah. I might be able to wrap my head around that, but the egregious behavior of infidelity tells me straight up in my mind and in most of our minds that you didn't care about me, you didn't care about the family, and you certainly don't care about this relationship. Otherwise, why would you have done it? And there's a lot of reasons that I might have done that, but at the heart of us all, it literally dismantles the fact that you don't care about me. And if I don't matter to you, and if this relationship doesn't matter, then I guess we're done. So there's a lot of conversation, and that's not the point of our conversation today. We have other podcast episodes that are absolutely dedicated to recovery of an affair. And if you're in this place, I would encourage you to highly check that out. But again, going back to the conversation we did want to have, trust gets broken in every single relationship you have ever been in or will ever be in. It's only a matter of time before we're going to disappoint the person that we love.
What are the more so common ones that we may not think would be a breach?
The idea of you committing to come to a dinner with me and our granddaughter and you never showed up.
Ouch.
Yeah. How about committing to mow down the backyard and I have no intentions of doing it? And so somebody's watching that and it just never happens. And the days go by and weeks go by and I keep going, yeah, I'm going to get to that. Yeah, I'm going to get to that. Or the fact that I'm plugged in and kind of cross and crabby and I attack you for seemingly no reason whatsoever. I just take my emotion out on you. And what I'm mentioning here, folks, are places where Tom and I have absolutely on the DL done these very things. Tom and I know what we're talking about right now. That's why he said, ouch. But I've done it. He's done it. You're going to do it. Everybody's done it. And so before you get all up in your high horse about how your partner is mistreating you, just recognize and realize there are probably times and places where you too are creating little teeny tiny breaches of trust in your relationship based on what we justify and how we're showing up. And I know, like Tom said, that's an ouch, but we need to be able to look at those things and understand those things and how they play out in our relationship. So that's why I confidently, with 100% money back guarantee, say to you, you are going to create breaches in your relationship. It's not about that, or what we call messes or compromises in our trust. It's about how we come back around and reset and clean them up effectively and efficiently and go forward from there to rebuild the emotional safety and the trust that we long for in our relationships. And that's why agreements are so important, because if we have agreements for my person that they know nothing about, I can use them as a test to see what they do, but it would probably be better for me to disclose them so that we all know and are playing the same agreement game, as opposed to me setting you up for failure. I have lots of clients who do that with each other. I play this role in my relationship, so I'm just going to stop and see what you're going to do. And they have no idea they're being tested. How about you set it up? I'm tired of doing this, and what I need from you is to pick up the ball here. Would you be willing to do that? Would probably be a better test of what's really playing out in your life and in your relationships. But we set each other up for a test all the time like that.
I would say a lot of times people don't consider the little unspoken promises that they make with their partner or that they expect their partner to know, just because it's maybe something they've done in the past. You know, you mow the lawn every Sunday, so therefore expect you to do it. But the other person doesn't know you're expecting that because you've never really fleshed it out as an agreement. But number two, if we don't do it one weekend or then we don't do it a couple weekends, we don't feel like we've broken anything because the agreement was never made. What we're trying to point out is that those little things are really important. So even if they're unspoken, it seems like to the other person that you've given up caring or that taking care of the house isn't important to you anymore. So therefore the relationship isn't important to you anymore. These jumps that we make, that's how our relationships begin to break down. Although that's not the correct way to go about it, because verbal agreements, it's important to get them out and on the table so that everyone knows what's expected of them. But these little tiny slights are considered betrayals and are a breach of trust. And I don't think that most people consider that. So what you're pointing out here is really important for you, the listener, to understand, because we all do it. It's not just cheaters. We all break trust with our partners in little ways, but those add up to big ways.
I think the greatest example that's coming to my mind in this moment is when you leave the house. I'm famous for this. If there was a place where I would need to improve, it would be here. It would be, I leave the house and I say, okay, I'm going to be back in a bit. And then one thing leads to another. I decide to stop in and say hi to the grandkids. And then I stop by the store and I think, oh, while I'm here, I'll go to this store. And 3 or 4 hours pass. I know where I am. I know what my intentions are. I know what I'm up to, but my partner doesn't. And it's like, hey, like, where are you? And if we're sitting in the void, wondering what's going on, it leaves us to, our minds can start going crazy places, right?
And I would just say from on this side of it, it's not that I'm not worried that Staci's having lunch with some man. It's more just
but you're worried where she is, like if she's okay.
Just a general, not a like Craig overzealous safety thing, but no, it's just after an extended period of time passed where I sensed she would be home, even on appointments. Sometimes Staci runs over and decides to do other things, especially in the evening. I'll say, "Is everything good?" I just want to know, just everything good?
Yeah. And I'm like, hey, I know where I'm at. Why are you worried?
So,
what's the problem? Yet the problem is that you've left somebody else hanging. And that happens with our agreements too. Hey, look, I know when I'm going to get to it. I know how this is going to go down. I've got this. But if we're not talking about it, the person that you're co-creating with is going to fill in the void. And when there has been breaches of betrayal, small or big,
turn into a horror movie.
This turns into a horror picture really fast. And it literally turns us crazy. I hope that you're starting to see that agreements are super important, that they really are the parameters of your relationship. And we can't really co-create anything unless we have a set of agreements. And these lack of agreements, or AKA in the pseudo form would be expectations, are going to rock your relationship. So I want you to understand why you need them. I want you to understand that they eliminate misunderstandings, they build trust, and they create a sense of we are in this together. How many times do we hear that? Co-creation is what a relationship is. They also build confidence in self and in the relationship. So to not be missed, we have to consciously think about, take the time, effort, and energy to create agreements, especially when we are experiencing egregious places of betrayal in our relationships.
All right, it's time to leave the Love Shack. But before we part ways, we want you to know our door is always open and we'll leave the porch light on, ready to welcome you back whenever you need a dose of relationship wisdom. For more resources and tools, visit us at loveshacklive.com.